The Nuremberg Trials are remarkable in many ways. Until then, war crimes or crimes against humanity were not clearly defined legally or not defined at all. At the same time, however, the defendants were to be granted a fair trial in accordance with the rule of law, while the global public was to be educated on the crimes of the National Socialist regime, and a legal foundation for dealing with future wars was to be established. Additionally, for the first time in history, leading members of a government were put on trial before an international court. The major war criminals trial against 21 high-ranking representatives of the Nazi regime was held from November 20th, 1945 until 1946 in the courtroom 600 of the Nuremberg Palace of Justice. The so-called follow-up trials were concluded in 1949. For the first trial, 4 judges and 4 alternate judges of the Allied powers were to determine the personal guilt of the defendants and find an adequate sentence. The indictments referred to crimes unprecedented in scale. These were, among others, planning and waging a war of annihilation, systematic mass murder, displacing civilian populations, and the destruction of entire cities. The task of the 4 prosecution teams was not an easy one. Even though the crimes of the Germans during the Second World War were committed for the whole world to see, were well documented, and there were many witnesses, a conviction was uncertain because the legal foundation for the trials had only been created with the London Charter and had not yet been proven. The trials were therefore especially important in order to find a legal response for crimes committed during the war. The different sentences then made it very clear that the trials were not about taking revenge, but about judging the crimes based on the existing documents and depositions. This notion is further supported in the defense counsel. All of them did their job voluntarily and had different reasons for participating in the trials. And last but not least, the press has to be mentioned. From the beginning, the Allies were aware of its importance. In order to secure the coverage of the trial that would be as complete as possible, office space, accommodation, and additional seats were created for the media representatives. And the demand was high. Reporters from over 20 nations took part and produced content for newspapers, the radio, and even film. This was done for the global public to enable it to form a detailed opinion of the trials and all of those involved. But there's another particularity to be mentioned. Due to the internationality of the trials, for the first time ever, a team of female and male interpreters simultaneously translated into all the relevant languages. A very difficult task, considering that many interpreters were themselves affected by the war. Despite the overwhelming media response and the pioneering role of the trials, for example, for the International Criminal Court in The Hague, it would be wrong to call them a success story only. Although most states today are committed to human rights and international law, the implementation of these principles is often challenged by foreign policy and the interests of individual states. This makes it all the more important to continue the public conversation about the Nuremberg trials and their significance in the future. And that is exactly what the exhibition at the Memoriam Nuremberg Trials does.